welcome back, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. As you know, we were talking about mental health, and we love exploring different topics in our society. So welcome back to The Intelligent World. And today we are joined by two very special friends of mine and two very special guests, Jordan Vaughn and David Brown. Both are mental health professionals, and we are just so excited that we get to ask them a few different questions. So this is a direct follow-up to our mental health in the pandemic episode. And this is a two-parter about the COVID-19 pandemic. Today we're focusing on mental health, and next time we'll be focusing on health profession and nursing and the medical field. But without further ado, thank you so much, David and Jordan, for being here today. And we just kind of want to hear about yourselves. If you can give us a little bit of information on yourselves. We'll start with Jordan. How's that?
Hello, everyone. Again, my name is Jordan Vaughn. I'm also a program coordinator for Chapman University. I oversee the orientation and first year experience program. And I also work in private practice. I graduated from Chapman University with a master's in marriage and family therapy in 2019. That's a little bit about me. And on the side, as we all keep busy with other things, I love cycling and being outdoors as much as I can.
All right, and my name is David Brown. I too have graduated from Chapman University with a master's in marriage and family therapy just this last year in 2020. I am currently working at Generations Church in Cerritos as an associate marriage and family therapist. A little bit else about me: I used to work with Daniel and Jordan doing orientation at Chapman. And I too also try and get out as much as possible, especially with these gorgeous days like we have today.
Thank you so much. So without further ado, we'd really love to just jump in and ask you both a few different questions. Again, both during this pandemic that we're in and also outside of the pandemic. So a little bit of both, but I'll let Chad go ahead and ask our first question here.
All right. Yeah, absolutely. So I just have a kind of like a general question to kind of start us off. So as therapists, do you guys happen to have like an on and off switch while you're talking to your therapists or not your therapist, your patients?
Jordan, you want to go ahead? I'll let you. Okay. I would say yes. I would say that most therapists, they kind of have like a persona that you would say that, we kind of do switch on, but I think it's a little bit different in other professions. And then in that, what we switch on is really more about what kind of questions are we going to ask? Where are we trying to get our clients in therapy, based off of what goals they have for themselves. And I think more so being a little bit more cognizant for myself, and Jordan can talk about this for her, but for myself, how is it that I can be the most genuine for this person in this space, and how caring can I be for them for what it is that they're going through? I guess in that sense, I think my language also changes quite a bit as well when I'm with my clients. So that for me, that's kind of how I change. And of course, I switch off, quote unquote. Again, my language changes and my demeanor might change and things like that. But I'll let Jordan go ahead and talk a little bit about her experience with that on and off.
I think it would be too easy to say that it is an on and off switch. It's almost like maybe for me, and every therapist is going to have a different style, is I like to mute other parts of myself that will not serve the client in that moment. So for example, when I'm entering into these conversations with these clients, it's not about me in this circumstance. So therefore, when I'm thinking about what I'm going to ask or how I'm going to respond, it's, will this support the client? Will this help the client? Or am I actually asking this or wanting to say this because it's me? So really kind of separating the two for me is really important. And then similar to what David was mentioning, like my language can change too. If I'm seeing a 16-year-old client, that looks very different than if I'm seeing a 55-year-old client, for example. So it's all about adapting to that person to what fits their needs best, if you can. We're also going to have our own individual styles in the room, but the hope is that you really are there for that person, and it's both supposed to be a whole hour or 50 minutes devoted to them and the work they're trying to accomplish.
Okay. I do have a question for you guys, because you kind of talked about this balance between, being genuine, trying to connect with them, but then also as a therapist, you all kind of have to not necessarily detach from like, or the emotion of like the scenario, you know, really be like, okay, what's the facts and how can we solve this? How do you guys find that proper balance, and what are some things that you guys use in order to like implement that? Let's maybe hop back to you, Jordan, maybe to start.
Yeah, so if I'm understanding the question correctly, you're asking how do we balance like those two motives in the room?
Exactly. Like making sure you're connecting with your people, but not getting too like sucked into it that you're like lost in the emotions that they're already falling into, you know?
Totally. And I think that's definitely a work in progress. I think throughout our time in the clinic,
Yeah.
we probably had some moments where you get, like you're saying, so wrapped up into that person's story that you can kind of lose sight of the work you're trying to accomplish. So you're always supposed to be listening to understand, but you also have like this guiding hand potentially with that client. So you don't want to think 5 steps ahead, for example, of what you're trying to accomplish in the session, because you want to be present in that moment. But you're trying to find things in the story and the narrative the client is saying to then support the work you're doing. So maybe the client might be getting lost in that story, but it's your job as the therapist to help guide them back. So it's almost like listening for those themes within that narrative throughout your time with the client.
Okay.
Yeah, I definitely agree with Jordan in that of, you know, the primary responsibility of the therapist in the room is to hold the emotions and the experiences of the client while also holding your own emotions and experiences. I think one of the greatest things that we can do as people is to use our own emotions to then, you know, come alongside other people. In this case, as a therapist, we use our emotions to then support the experience of our clients and say, you know what, I hear what you're saying. I understand what's going on for you, and really bringing out those raw emotions that may not be recognized by the client because sometimes they're a little bit more overwhelmed by that story. I think the other component about holding that is, you know, oftentimes we therapists have groups of other therapists that we collaborate with. You know, it's not uncommon for other therapists to meet with maybe a group of 4 others, you know, and they'll meet once a month and they'll talk about their experiences in therapy of, you know, this is really difficult for me because maybe this is something that happened for me in my past. And, you know, having those supports is very important, especially in this profession where it can be, you know, really difficult when we hear about some of the traumas. But I think those are just a couple of the tactics or the ways that we really kind of use emotion, but also kind of helping separate it from ourselves a little bit. And like Jordan said, you know, that is a learning process. Nobody teaches you how to do that, right? Like if your friend tells you like, oh man, you know, I just witnessed a shooting the other day, and they're telling you all this trauma, and, you know, most likely you're going to take a lot of that heaviness with you after that conversation. And so just like anything else, you know, it is a skill and it's something that we practice, but you know, we do it in a really healthy way that's more beneficial for us as therapists. It allows us to grow, and then from that helps our clients to grow from that too.
Yeah, makes sense. And a follow up on that. So you kind of said it's a matter of kind of balancing and making sure you don't get too emotionally like yourself open on it. Do you guys ever find that kind of makes it difficult to like build a genuine trusting relationship with the client? And does the client ever feel that? Or is if you do it the proper way, the client ever shouldn't really feel like that? What would you say your thoughts are on that?
I would say I personally, I've never found that very difficult. I would say compared to many people who have come into the mental health field, I might have more practice in that, you know, I started my journey in the mental health field when I was in high school. And so I was taught a lot of the methods to kind of keep those things in balance and making sure that I have those supports. So yeah, I think but for definitely, you know, it can still be difficult, and depending on the day, right? If it's been a really exhausting week, then that might be a little bit harder, but that's where those supports come in. But I'm going to let Jordan go ahead and talk it, because I'd love to hear her point of view.
I don't know if I've experienced that yet either. I say yet because it is always a possibility, correct? I mean, there are so many people in this world, and it's definitely possible that a potential client might come and see me, and maybe for some reason that connection is not there. I don't believe it'd be on my behalf in terms of worrying about me separating myself, because I do this work because I think people are the most fascinating things in this world. And I just love that one-on-one connection. But it definitely something you want to keep in mind with the client is that if they are not themselves feeling it with you in that relationship, our goal is always to support them. And if that means even providing a referral or providing them other opportunities to find that connection they're looking for, we want to support them in that as well. So I haven't yet experienced it, but definitely depending on clients and what they're experiencing, some cases might be more difficult than others for a variety of reasons.
I kind of want to take a fun turn. I just came up with this just now. And we're all familiar with the TV show called Friends, right? Awesome. Great. We're all good people here. So in one of the episodes, Phoebe has a boyfriend named Roger, and Roger is a psychiatrist. And in the show, initially, he's bemused by the wacky, quirky, goofy personalities of the friends, but he eventually causes them to take a dislike to him by being too analytical about their personality and psychological issues. Since you guys are therapists yourselves, have you ever met another therapist who's just too analytical? They're like, listen, your job is not something you got to do every day. There's an hour for this. Have you ever met other people kind of like that, kind of overdoing it?
I would say yes. I've had a couple classmates that were definitely like that, and I think this is kind of gives credence to Jordan's point earlier, right? Is that there are many different types of therapists, and some people are just analytical people in general, whereas some people are more emotional. I think that's a benefit just because we have many different types of clients and they like different types of things as, different types of therapists. But yeah, I think it definitely can be hard to shut off at first, especially when we as therapists are first learning. We have all this information, and I think as people, when you have such great information, the temptation to use it all the time is there. And so we'll start, looking at things differently. I know for myself personally that I've looked at my friends' relationships a little bit differently, especially when I was in my doing the couples course that we take. I was like, wow, that's really interesting. Look at the balance of the relationship. And for me personally, it's, something that I do have to check myself on. Like, am I here in this moment to be a therapist, or am I here just to be a person? And making sure that, I ask myself those important questions so that, I get the same amount of enjoyment out of life that I would as anybody else, and making sure that I'm like not there as their therapist because, that's not my role, right? These are my friends or these are my family members. And so I need to be there in that kind of capacity.
I think it definitely can be easy sometimes to get too analytical. For example, my roommate is also someone who is in private practice and is a therapist full time. And we were watching the Meghan Markle and Harry interview with Oprah. We had the best time just going through and just analyzing it just for what it was worth, everything they were giving us. But that's all, they were on a screen. We didn't have to have that interaction with them. So yes, I think there's definitely therapists out there who might tend to go to that analytical side, but also some clients might be potentially looking for that. So I don't know if I want to truly discount that fully. Everyone's style is valid in their own reason, but also I think you're kind of skating around that idea of burnout and whether that means maybe they're seeing too many clients in a day. Maybe they don't have time to relax and take time for themselves. And that's a whole different rabbit hole we could go down.
All right. Well, let's get into a little bit of pandemic talk. So how important is therapy in general in the context of the pandemic? Like me, I'll admit myself, I personally I've been having a hard time, maybe because I've been really staying at I've been in this room most of the hours of the day. I'm starting to get really sick of it. So when it comes to the mental health during a pandemic, how much what's the gravity there for you guys on your side?
Yeah, I thought about this a little bit and beforehand, and I think the question might be of maybe the pandemic is making people realize how important mental health is in therapy, how important it is to go to therapy. Maybe not the other way around, right? Of how important is therapy now that we're in a pandemic? More of how important is therapy in general. And maybe how has the pandemic made people realize that? Because, yeah, we have been inside. I think more so we look at the societal context of things too. That is very important in therapy. of, you know, what's going you know, what's going on with this individual, or what's going on around this individual. And so I would say that can be very important in this pandemic of, you know, what kind of factors are we looking at as, you know, as this therapist, of, you know, who this person is, but more so, what are they dealing with additionally with the pandemic?
One pro to the pandemic thus far has been that therapy has never been more accessible. So folks can now do this in their own home, in their cars, on their phones. And right now, a lot of state guidelines have been able to support if folks move from state to state, you might be able to still stick with that potential therapist. So those are all incredible things that this pandemic has brought us, is that therapy is also even more, I would argue to say, more widely accepted. I actually was telling someone, I think in 10, 15 years, it'll be odd if you haven't had a therapeutic experience before. Now I think it's now become normalized versus the stigma that used to be around it. But on the other side, as you mentioned, Marco, with the room and you're in your own space all the time, I think it exacerbates things that are already there, potentially, especially with our relationships. But it also is bringing us new challenges and things that we don't really know how to deal with, because there isn't really a narrative for us to look back on or to say, oh, yes, this is how I grew from that, or I grew stronger from this. I can't remember the last time someone goes, yeah, I spent 3 weeks in my room straight without going outside, and I grew from that. So I definitely think it's just an entirely new potential concern that no one has ever dealt with. And I think that is also one of the scariest parts of the pandemic, is that it truly is the unknown.
Yeah, there's a lot of new things on us right now, and everyone is trying to figure it out together. And like, you guys are therapists, but you're also trying to figure it out as you go with it, which is kind of like, hey, I can look back on this moment in the future if it were to ever happen again, knock on wood. So yeah, thank you so much.
All right, so David and Jordan, my question to you guys is, Jordan, you just talked about how in 10 to 15 years you could see therapy becoming, you know, more basically just full on mainstream and as a normal thing. My question to both of you guys is, during this pandemic, whether it was at the beginning or now at this point, even with the vaccines going on, do you guys see a rise in the amount of, like, you know, patients that therapists are seeing? And do you guys see a rise or spike in that, or has it kind of remained the same, or do you find people are still kind of afraid to go to therapy, or how does that work, you know, on your guys' end?
So when I graduated, this was in 2019, one of the actual reasons that I also chose to pursue another career with therapy was that I was worried about building a caseload. I was worried about supporting myself financially through that process. So now going back into private practice, I have been blown away with how many clients have been reaching out. I never expected that. Truth be told, I always thought it would be a slow build. And now it's like an overwhelming amount of people who are seeking these services. So that's just my experience. But I would say, yes, there are more people out there who are seeking it than they were before. And almost all the initial conversations you have with these clients is, oh yeah, so in the pandemic. And then it's almost like that was the Kickstarter to then maybe, again, what was already there, or why they're like, yes, I finally have decided to seek that support. So that would be my answer to that.
Yeah, I would similarly mirror that answer. You know, when the pandemic first started, you know, I was still in graduate school. I was seeing clients. I was probably seeing, you know, total in a week, I had maybe 15 clinical hours a week. And right when the pandemic started, that went down to 3 clinical hours a week, because people, you know, stopped coming to therapy. They weren't sure, you know, how therapy was going to work. Many people were very skeptical about doing telehealth, you know, right? Having a therapy session over Zoom. But then a few weeks later, my caseload, you know, I was easily doing 30 hours of clinical hours a week. So it more than doubled. And, you know, ever since, you know, starting my own practice and things like that, you know, I've had people call me saying, oh my gosh, like, I'm just so thankful that you even called me back. You know, you're like the 20th therapist that I've called, and you're the only one who's called me back. You know, that's how swamped therapists are. Like, I have many people who are like, you know what, I don't have room. I will call you because, you know, I know that you have room in your caseload. And I'm like, great, bring it on, and they're like, I just have said no to so many people. It's kind of disheartening. So mental health in this pandemic has skyrocketed. And I would say in some cases, there may not be enough therapists going around depending on where you live and things like that. But so yeah, it has become a little crazy. I mean, understandably so, right? you just been stuck in this room for weeks, and so how do I deal with that? Or even this was something else I thought about for the younger generation. How do I date in a pandemic? How do I go to college in a pandemic? I'm graduating high school. How does college work now? I knew how it worked before, but now I'm not really sure. How do I make friends in college for people who are older? How do I get my grandkids to come see me safely without, potentially getting the virus? So there's a lot of new questions to be asked and explored.
So Jordan, I actually have another question for you. This is, you mentioned COVID starts as a Kickstarter question. Do you find, and this also goes for you, David, do you guys find that now most of your clients are kickstarting with, problems with COVID, or is it still other problems that, are still therapist related, or how exactly does that work? I mean, I imagine it's difficult hearing about all of this, and then, but I also imagine it's pretty hard to talk about. So do you guys find one way that they start is easier than another, or is it all just is it mainly COVID streamed, or?
Every client is different, right? But I think at least through every client I have personally talked to, whether it be potential or not, it's like somehow the pandemic is woven in. So meaning it could be that, for example, I have been struggling with parenting and with my husband, but then when I went to online learning with the pandemic, it has just exacerbated that problem for me. So therefore I want to seek support for that. Or it becomes so I have been wondering about this for so long. I've been wanting to seek support, but then with the pandemic now, I have the time to get on a phone call, or I don't need to then drive to my potential therapist for a 30-minute drive. So there's a lot of reasons why I wouldn't say that the pandemic was like the end all be all, but it almost feels like it's always woven into the conversations I've had thus far, whether that be a reason to also even get started, or these problems have been exacerbated by the pandemic.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I could add too much more to that. Jordan said that beautifully. So I think that, yeah, I've had a very similar experience.
Well, thank you guys for taking the time to answer that question.
Yeah, thank you.
Sorry,
go ahead, Chad. Sorry.
Yeah, no worries. I have another question. So in our previous episode, we talked about mental health and how it's affected us during this pandemic, and how this pandemic has created a lot of stress and anxiety with all of us. So I just want to ask, like, have you seen like a sort of like buildup in mental health, and how it has like this pandemic affected people's mental health in a good or a bad way?
I think going back to what Jordan and I keep saying, every client is different, and their life circumstances, at this moment can change that, right? I think in general, this pandemic has kind of created, we are all now risk managers of sorts, right? Every time we go out, we may think of, okay, is that safe to do? Am I actually worried about that? The pros and cons of getting the vaccine, the pros and cons of, going to see my friends, going to see my family. So I would say in that sense, it has caused people to be more thoughtful, and whether that's positive or negative can really be dependent upon where the person was prior to the pandemic, and then I think in combination of what their experiences have been like thus far. Like one of my clients, she came to therapy because she dealt with anxiety for a long time, and the pandemic, she didn't leave her house for months, like many. But working through therapy, it turned into a more positive experience in that, she and I were able to work together to then change anxiety into, more of a force of being a friend of sorts, allowing her to have positive risk management skills and allowing her to find more space and freedom in life to choose to do things. But I think for me, that's just kind of been my experience with my clients. And I'm sure Jordan has many different experiences with that. So I'll let her go ahead.
And before Jordan takes over really quick, I am curious, because let's even say disregarding the pandemic, we've just seen a massive rise in people that are more anxious, more depressed, and all these things. And I'm curious to hear from you guys. Okay, what are some, I say, triggers that have caused that? And then kind of following up after that, like what are some things we can do? Obviously, we have us ourselves, these people here, but also like how can we influence other people to make sure these things don't happen? Because it's quite scary and astounding, the figures, and nobody should ever have to go through these feelings and such. So I'll stop talking. I'm curious to hear your guys' opinion on that.
Yeah. I think the first thing to note on that aspect is just that in general, anxiety and depression over the past 20 years or so has been on the rise. We've seen increasing numbers like never before. I think that kind of points to the importance of mental health in general. I think as far as what you can do, many of the things that I suggest to my clients is, finding alternative ways to be with your loved ones, and kind of challenging your perspective. I think the question of, is being online good enough versus being in person? And yes, we have to acknowledge that being in person is, I would say most people would say is preferable, unless you have like social anxiety or something like that. But, most of us do prefer being in person, but kind of challenging the notion of, is being online good enough for me? And how can I make it a positive experience versus continuing to have that negativity of this isn't good enough, this isn't the same, versus, I'm just really glad to see this person, that I can see their face and interact with them. Sure, we may be online, but at least we have a space to do that. And at least we can make sure that we're being safe. The other thing is exercise. As Jordan and I both said, we both try and get out as much as possible. I always tell my clients, let's be part of the human solar panel experiment. Vitamin D is very important in the way that we function as people. So going outside for 30 minutes or more a day is extremely helpful and helps fight anxiety, in the sense that exercise is very beneficial for you. Exercise helps fight depression as well. And so those are just things that I really push for my clients.
The pandemic is probably one of the widest shared experiences our people in this world right now will face together. So thinking about that, then that means a lot of times with our clients, potentially the roots of their anxiety and depression can be that pandemic based. So it's like we're all experiencing these certain things, but yet we're also doing it alone, which is what a conundrum. I think David was mentioning some great points about it's almost about thinking about other parts of your life that bring you joy, or what you can build upon to then support those pieces that do not feel as what they used to be, I guess would be a phrase for that. But also, I would also challenge that we are going to feel this way. People are going to feel this way. So thinking that we have like this magic fix of, yes, like we can improve your depression because we're going to go see people. Because honestly, that is your part of your depression potentially, right? We can't. So that it also becomes an idea of like, we also want to normalize that experience of like, if you are feeling those feelings of depression, of anxiety, that doesn't mean you're wrong. That doesn't mean that you're less than of a person because you're feeling that way. It's the truth. So then thinking about ways to even rewrite or reframe how potential clients could view these symptoms or view these things that they're experiencing in, I think would also support in their healing process. Because it's also about, Zoom is great, but the truth is it's not the same. And you're not going to get the same benefits as you would from being in person. But it's all about what can we do in the meantime to build other parts of your life up to then help offset those things that you're experiencing.
And within all this, I think a lot of it is focused on the pandemic, obviously. But in regards to social media, what do you guys believe social media's effect has on, because like David was saying, for the past 20 years, we've been seeing a fairly unnerving trend towards worsening mental health. How do you think social media kind of comes into the picture there?
I don't love social media. I'm not on TikTok. I don't understand it. So here's my perspective on social media. It's almost like you get in what you put into it. So if you want to seek support. If you honestly just want to follow your friends to see how they're doing, you can gain that. However, it can turn into a potentially toxic place, as I'm sure folks have talked about or heard about, like that fear of missing out factor, that constant comparison, that open forum, honestly, for judgment can happen. And no one is immune to those things. So it's all about how can you manage your time or get from social media, honestly, what you're hopefully trying to gain and not end up scrolling for 3 hours, as I'm sure all of us have potentially done. I just did that last night, just scrolling away. Was that beneficial to my health? The answer is no. So thinking about also giving yourself a little grace too in those moments, that social media is there and it can be a crutch just like any other thing.
I would say the same. I really don't like social media. I don't have very much social media. I think I just have Facebook and LinkedIn, and I think Twitter. I don't use any of those that often. I would say LinkedIn more for professional reasons. But yeah, I would agree with Jordan that, there are just so many, especially now. I think there was just a report the other day of college students who saw what was happening in Florida for spring break. And they're like, man, I feel like I'm being punished. And I have, so much FOMO. And I think it is becoming a little bit excessive, and we do have to monitor that, like Jordan said, of what is it that I'm expecting from this? What am I wanting to get out from it?
Yeah, thank you, everyone. Before we continue, let's go to a quick break. When we come back, we'll take a little bit of a deeper technical turn into all this. Stick with us. All right, thank you for continuing to stick with us. We have been discussing mental health, specifically in the pandemic. And now we're going to take a little bit more of a technical turn here. We've talked about a variety of different things, mostly, how has the pandemic affected mental health? And while most of the answers have been, just absolutely wonderful, there is a kind of generalization here in the sense of, at least in my opinion, everyone is different, right? So everyone needs a certain approach. Now, where we kind of want to take this question is, or this topic here is, what do you think are certain variables that are exacerbating worsening mental health? As we've said, and as we read some statistics last time we met, it's just the rise in depression and anxiety and in substance abuse has just skyrocketed in a year, in a year since we've entered the pandemic. So not only has there been a rise over the last 20 years, like David was saying, now there's been a sharper increase in this past year. So are there certain factors, or certain variables that are at cause because of this? For example, is it a lack of social interaction? Could it be a lack of sunlight? Could it be a lack of physical activity? I mean, the list goes on and on of what potential factors might be. And of course, it changes for every person. But are there maybe some general factors across the board that are the leading factors to this worsening trend?
I think some of the most common factors, I think, is what Jordan has pointed out, is that we are all stuck at home for, at least for the beginning of the pandemic. And I just don't think people were used to that, of being in one space. I think, let alone especially for families, right? Being in one space together for one time. I know quite a few school psychologists, and one of the things that they talk about is how children and parents, their interactions are much different, because normally parents they would go to work during the day, and their kids would go to school for 8 hours a day. And now they see each other all the time. And how is it that they manage those interactions? Let alone, how do parents change their parenting to a more hands-on approach versus, just dropping their kids off at school, letting the teachers or advisors kind of take that role. I think something that I've been experienced more on is for those who are stuck in the home with abusers, whether that be children, those in the LGBTQ plus community, whoever, these people are now stuck at home with their potential abusers. And, there's the rise of substance use. I mean, like you said, there are countless factors that really play into the rise of mental health. And as Jordan has continually pointed out, which is spot on, of what was there beforehand. What were people not talking about or not dealing with before the pandemic that, now they're stuck inside and they have quite a bit of extra time on their hands, that they can actually think about it now and kind of let that sink in.
Maybe give a couple of specifics that immediately came to my mind that could potentially be a widespread or something that a lot of us are experiencing is job loss, especially for families. That is a huge stress. And knowing that also we don't really know when this pandemic will end. So thinking about how incredibly scary that is, stressful if you have a family, and that question of can I provide, whether that be for yourself or your family, that would, I think, is something that is being experienced on such a wide scale, probably larger than we've ever seen before, right, in our history. So that's one. And then the other, taking a wider lens of with our social community in terms of the US and what's going on, is BLM, Stop Asian Hate. All those things people all experience in some capacity, meaning they've heard about it, they've experienced it themselves, they've gone to protests, and everyone internalizes that very differently on a widespread of ideas, right, and biases and perspectives. So that is also a very unique thing that is happening right now that I would say hasn't happened in the last probably 40 years on such a widespread scale across the United States. And I think everyone is taking that differently and experiencing that in some degree to a lot of concerns, fear, anger, and also just sadness.
Yeah, and kind of jumping off of that, actually, with the pandemic creating a lot of fear and stress, with a lot of people losing loved ones, unfortunately, due to this disease. Do we think that a lot of people are panicking a little bit too much and often creating a kind of affecting their mental health in that way?
Yes. I would maybe challenge potentially the panicking too much, because that's also what is valid versus what is also being experienced, right? So when I thought about it, and you all might have experienced that, when I first went to Target, when things were just rolling out, we had just gone at home, just had a stay-at-home order, I was so anxious at that Target trip. I was like, I don't even know if masks were a thing yet. I can't quite recall. But it was just like, someone would look at you and you're like, oh my God, do they have it? And then you look at them and you're like, oh my God, do they think I have it? And then, you don't want to sneeze. You don't want to do anything. So I think that was experienced at such a wider scale. And like David said earlier, you almost have to ask yourself more of these questions when you're going out in those personal one-on-one interactions than you did before. And it almost adds that extra layer of difficulty, I would say, in terms of thinking about when are you going to make that choice to go outside? When are you going to make that choice to also be in person?
Before I give it sorry, go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, I have one last follow-up question. What do you guys think the role of news, primarily during the pandemic, has caused with people's mental health?
I would say that the news has caused a big, I would say it's probably a big contributing factor to the pandemic. I think especially when we add in the political, just environment that we have right now, in the sense that we have, news channels that are on this side, and we have news channels that are on this side, and then we have independent ones too. And so I think that definitely complicates things of, who is listening to what. And then I think going off of what Jordan was saying earlier with, BLM and all the other social factors and, contributors that are going on at the moment, just adding fuel to the fire of panic, confusion, being unsure, does this virus exist? Who created it? Who we want someone to blame, yet there's nobody to blame at the moment. So there's that pent up anger. So we put it in other things. And yeah, I would say the news has been a contributing factor. And one of the things that I recommended to my clients very early on in the pandemic is stop watching the news. I want you to not watch the news. You're tempted to watch the news. And as your therapist and as someone who genuinely cares about you, don't. Just stop it. It was, and I had those conversations with them. And so, yeah, it can be very difficult when you want information too.
So going off with that, sorry, I'm going to give it to Mark right after this, but there's been a common theme in the last three questions asked, and it relates to something that we talked about last time. And I brought up that maybe it could be one of the most maybe underlying factors is, like you said, David and Jordan, we're stuck in this room and now there's more time for a routine to occur, right? But in this routine, there's also more time for rumination to happen. So that, again, is what I defined last time, but it, in some instances, it can be a positive. In this instance, I'm talking about in a negative light, where we're focusing continually and thinking on one thing or a few different things, right? And it usually has a negative light because you're internalizing something and continually criticizing yourself. So what I'm kind of at least deciphering here is that there is this common theme of there's more time for rumination. So whether it be asking yourself of, should I go outside today, or should I go to the store, or should I watch the news, we're internalizing every single thing we're either watching, hearing, looking, every decision we make. And now that turns into rumination because we're constantly criticizing ourselves, either through comparison through social media or just comparing ourselves through that rumination. Is that, am I correct? Am I picking up on something? Or what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think there is a lot more. It's almost like the whole suffering in silence perspective. Like we mentioned, everyone's going through a different experience, but we're all sharing the same reason why they're there. And you do have a lot of time to ruminate on potential thoughts. I mean, I think now that folks are slowly finding a routine, it was initially difficult when we started the pandemic because no one knew how long this would last, so to speak. When will this thing end? So it's almost like for a while there, folks might have said, oh, I can stick this out for X amount of time. But then as that time kept growing and expanding, it became more difficult. So it's almost like folks started their routines too late, I would dare say, for some. And that now that you're now starting it, that you're dealing with almost like all that potential baggage that might have happened during that time of sitting in that stillness, so to speak.
Yeah, I think a good picture of what that might look like is when you take a big ball of mud and you throw it in some water. At first the water is going to be clear, right? But eventually that water is going to separate out into the sediment and to the clear water. And honestly, people are fine with the clear water, like, oh, this part is great, but they don't know what to do with the mud at the bottom. And that's kind of what we as therapists are dealing with at the moment. And some people got there faster than others. Like, you know what, I don't want this mud in my water, in my bucket anymore. And some people are just getting to that point where their sediment is starting to settle. So it just kind of depends, on where they are and how they've handled it so far.
When it comes to, what are your guys' thoughts on there being a debate on the existence of a virus, and especially on the fact that it's like, this is kind of questioning like the science behind it. It's, because honestly, me personally, no way can this be a hoax if the whole world is having the same problem. It's like, did the whole world just get together and be like, hey, let's come up with a fake virus? When it comes to like being a therapist or a psychiatrist, a person in the scientific field, whether it's, it's you guys are more in the mental state of it, but you guys are still people of science. How frustrating is that? Like, what are you guys' personal beef, if any?
This question actually made me nervous, not gonna lie, because I was thinking about what would happen if a client came to me, and potential client who wants to see me and says, yeah, so I think this virus is BS. What do you think? And myself, my answer is, yeah, I don't think there's any way that this is BS. But then thinking about how could I still support that client if they still wanted to see me, get through things that they wanted to get through, knowing that we are at two very different swings on the pendulum. So I would then, I guess, if they wanted to ask me that question, sure, I would answer honestly and openly. But then it's about, can we still work together to then be able to accomplish what you're hoping to, or what are the goals that you're hoping to seek here in therapy? So that's like kind of my first thought on that question. But me personally, living in my daily life, it makes me sad to see some of that but it also, am I surprised? No, I think this is actually the perfect example of people and who they are. We're going to have people at all walks of life, all different parts of the spectrum. And as much as sometimes I want to like shake people and be like, can't you see this? Can't you see what's going on? I also have to respect them and their beliefs in another way too. So yeah, it's a struggle, that's for sure.
I would agree. I also thought about this question, Jordan. I was like, wow, what an interesting, point of view. And I think that's one of the great things about being a therapist is that I have my clients, they stretch my points of view all the time. And that's one of the reasons I love being a therapist. It's like, okay, well, walk me through that. How do you live your life then? Why do you think that? I mean, there are also people out there who think the moon landing is fake, that, the Holocaust didn't happen. And, there's all these conspiracy theories about all these world events. And so, I think, like Jordan said, it's meeting that person where they're at. Yeah, I can answer genuinely, but at the same time, my curiosity kind of takes over. And like, what, I would still love to work with you because, I'm genuinely interested in why you have that perspective. And I think especially as Jordan and I, as therapists, we are consumers of research. We learn things all the time. And so, this is just kind of the field that we are in. And that's just kind of how we have to go with it of, okay, tell me more about that.
Yeah, before I give it to Matt, I just want to say thank you so much for answering that question. I know that was kind of a tough one, and we put that in. I just want to kind of take this opportunity to say we are a very diverse group of people, at least our friend group, different side of the aisles on everything. So it's great when we get to be able to talk about this, from a certain point of view, and just thank you for answering that. I know that's been tough, but we really appreciate that. So go ahead, Matt.
All righty. You guys, as therapists, what are some things that we can do to keep up our mental health, especially during this time? I mean, you've talked about how growing, after 3 weeks of staying in your room really doesn't get you anywhere. I mean, in your guys' personal opinions, what are the best ways for us to continue growing during this pandemic,
I'm so sorry, but just before you answer, Jordan, I'm so sorry. Chris does have to leave us. So thank you so much, Chris, for joining us today. And any last thoughts for you really quick before we have Jordan answer the question?
David, Jordan, really appreciate your time. Sorry, I have another thing I've run off too. And see you guys all soon. Okay, bye.
Sorry, Jordan, go ahead.
So I think each person's going to need to assess these things differently. But first, I'd say start small. I mean, you're not going to move mountains and change your life, especially at home right now, in like a one routine change. So I would say, again, give yourself grace, but also it's all about starting a routine. Routines take a while to be established. So, for example, if you're at home all day, I work at home all day. So how can I vary up my time literally in one place? So sometimes that means, am I changing rooms just to get a change of scenery? Am I giving myself 15-minute breaks where I have to actually stand up and walk outside? Am I planning something to look forward to? That one's huge because if you're creating these routines are great. Humans actually thrive off of having that consistency. Having something to look forward to helps the monotony of it all. So that could be, again, something small. Like, is it a treat yourself kind of night at the end of the night? Is it a favorite TV show or movie? Is it a phone call with a friend? Are you able to see someone in person safely? Those kinds of things. It helps you plan for something and almost have your mind somewhere to dream and drift off to.
Yeah, I would agree with everything that Jordan has said, and I think this is one of the main parts of therapy nowadays too. For how do we create these routines? Like I said earlier, exercise is fantastic for you. If you can, make those moments for yourself, whether that's a walk around the block for 10 minutes, a quick break like Jordan was talking about, whether if you're just sitting outside, I think even if you can make a small little day trip somewhere, in a safe manner. I mean, I would say for myself, one of the things I like to do is plan little treats for like food. Like, oh, maybe I'm going to go get Joe's Italian Ice tonight and make that a special thing. And like, those are all part of having things to look forward to. I would say also, one thing I've also advocated for my clients is learning new skills. There are things that people talk about doing all the time of, I would really love to do this. Like one of my clients, they like to work on pinball machines, and they had a pinball machine in their garage that they just didn't have time to work on. And they're like, yeah, I need to learn how to work on electrical. I'm like, well, there's Skillshare, you could do that. There's lots of videos on YouTube on how to work on electrical. I worked on how do we look up those things together in therapy so that you can start learning and practicing those things that you've wanted to do as self-improvement. And so one of the things that we kind of have to do in these times is be more imaginative of what we can do with our time versus what we think we can do with our time given the quarantine. So that can be a little bit of a challenge, but with a little bit of thought and maybe a little bit of help, outside help, we can find some things that can really be beneficial to add into our routines.
Well, my next question then is as a little bit of help, I would like to ask you guys the challenge question of, if you guys had 3 things that you guys could recommend, whether it is going to Joe's Italian Ice or, watching a movie, treating yourself to a movie or something like that, what would be 3 things that you can recommend to our viewers as something that could kickstart them off the bat and get them going to go do something at least?
I only have my first 2 picked up, but the third will come to me. First one, have at least one intentional conversation for you every day. We all spend a lot of time with work and other things helping other folks move forward. Have a conversation for you. It's worth the time and it's worth the effort. 2, get outside. Doesn't matter how long, doesn't matter where, doesn't matter when, just do it. It can even be at nighttime. I know vitamin D is important, but I think it's all about, again, changing that scenery and space for you and fit it into when you need it. And the third one, I hadn't come up with that one yet. I'd say think about what you put into your body. I think diet is huge, and it's something that actually greatly impacts potential depression and anxiety. So I'm not saying go crazy and just eat plants and veggies all day, because that's unrealistic for most, not all. But it's just thinking about what can you do to give yourself the life and energy that you're also craving from yourself and others.
Thank you.
David? That's a tough one. I think Jordan took quite a few of them. But I think one of the most important things that we can all do for ourselves and that we can do for others is uphold hope. Hope is such a powerful thing that we oftentimes forget. And, unfortunately, it is very easy just to look at the negative things in life. But making that cognitive switch of, what, I'm going to see things positively. What can I find that is positive in this situation? And how is it that I can continue to uphold hope for myself and for those around me, is extremely powerful. And it's something that we often forget. And again, this is just kind of part of human nature, in that we often look at the negative things just because it's much easier. But making that cognitive switch to finding the positive things, finding things that are hopeful, is invaluable, to be honest, in this pandemic. And just one of the greatest things that we can do for ourselves, and one of the greatest things that we can do for others. It could be even a small little comment. I have some family members, they'll go, and when we're out, say we're buying something, and one of my family members, my cousin, she'll see a woman with nice nails, and she'll be like, "Oh my gosh, girl, your nails are fire!" Like, that little thing can really mean a lot to her. That could be like, "Man, I felt kind of crappy today, but that comment really brought me something." And it doesn't have to be huge. And so I would say I would just kind of offer that for whoever is listening, and even for ourselves as a good reminder.
Well, thank you guys. That's the last question from me. And so with that, I just want to personally thank you guys. Thank you for answering these questions. Daniel, take it away.
Yeah, I think Marco's next, right, with the next question.
Mm-hmm. I'm kind of going back a little bit about when it comes to other therapists, psychiatrists, colleagues. The TV really, this is a personal question I've always wanted to ask a real therapist. I just haven't had to go to therapy lately, but I've always wondered, there's these TV shows that show like, oh my god, this person can read people so easily and all that. Is that attainable? Like, for therapists or psychiatrists, can you really like develop that skill of just like, you can like read a person by the way they dress, the way they fiddle with their hand? Is that stuff you guys, I mean, obviously you guys do learn that, but is that something that's very good to have, or is it kind of like excessive to be able just to read people without having to talk to them?
I think if I say years from now, I could read people up and down, I think that means something's wrong with me. Only because I think it's important that people to continue to surprise me. I think if I all of a sudden lost that ability to really just be excited about what someone is going to tell me and just be like, oh, I already know them backwards and forwards, I'm done. I wouldn't recommend me as a therapist. However, I do think there are certain skills out there that you do gain a lot from what folks do in terms of body language, how they dress, how they interact. Fun fact, my sister almost became a behavior analyst for the FBI. So yes, there are those positions out there, and there's a lot of gain in terms of there's patterns that you can find. And some things, yeah, it's almost like certain aspects may not surprise you because it's something that's almost like that's 100% what's going to happen if someone is this, this, and this. I don't personally have that skill. I think I can gain a lot of thoughts or maybe potential reasons or things that I might guess from someone, but I would never say that that's the end all be all because people are all unique for a reason. And that's kind of the best part, right?
I 1000% agree with Jordan. If I ever get to that point and I just, right there on the spot, judge that person of this is who they are, this is what they're about, that would definitely be a sad day. For me personally, that would be a sad day because one, again, like Jordan said, people are very different. And what makes them different is one of the perks of one, being human, but two, being a therapist. You get to learn about them. And I'm a naturally curious person. So if I just immediately judge that person, I would be like, wow, my curiousness is gone, so I would need to take a step back as a professional and be like, okay, how do I regain that? And two, one of the things that we stress as therapists is a non-judgmental stance. We're not here to judge someone. We're not here to say this is who you are definitively because you do this, this, and this. It's more the other way around of, okay, I noticed this, this, and this. So I may want to ask questions, very much like Jordan said. Like one time I had a client, first time meeting them, and they came in their pajamas. I was like, okay, it's like 80 degrees outside, and they're wearing like a really fuzzy pants, really fuzzy jacket. Okay, their hair is a little unkept. Okay, maybe something I want to ask about, like, it's 80 degrees outside. Why are you wearing these, very warm clothes in 80 degrees? And so it's just kind of things like that, yeah, we do pick up, but we ask more questions than we, judge.
Perfect. Chad, take it away with the last question.
Yeah, absolutely. So as we wrap up the show here, my last question is, are there any like final thoughts on how or any other information you want to tell our viewers on how they could stay safe and how they could do their part in helping get through this pandemic and ultimately beat this virus?
I think by our faces you can tell that that's a pretty tough question.
Yeah, I think you guys got stumped right there, Chip.
I think that's just a really difficult question in general. I think instead what I would offer is, do what makes you feel safe, but do so in a way that is beneficial towards your mental health, towards your physical health, towards your social health. Making sure that you are still taking care of yourself. If you're wearing a mask, go ahead and do that. In other places that don't require them, if you feel safe enough not to wear a mask, do that also. But I think on the other hand of, having compassion on others who don't think like you do as well is extremely important, and not judging them because they have a different experience than you do. Trying to find an understanding of where might the person be at, I think, is extremely important in bringing communities together and finding a greater understanding of where we are in the pandemic and where others might be in their own experience and their own journey throughout the pandemic. I think that is just very crucial at a time where we are very split. And so grace to yourself and to others.
I think if I could give one takeaway to everyone in the world right now, it'd be, it's okay to not be okay. I think we're always trying to be like, oh yeah, how can we get better? How can we do better? And sometimes we do need to sit in that discomfort and sit in those feelings in order to then get out of it. So I'd say don't over rush that process, because also the entire world in some degree is in it with you. So I would also say try to find comfort in that too, that you're also not alone and not feeling alone. But then the second piece you mentioned, Chad, which kind of stumped me, was that also how to keep people safe and how to help move this pandemic along. So like, ooh, that's kind of like a two-parter for me. So I'd say second, I work for a gym, an outdoor gym right now, and I see folks every time I'm out of shift who are not following the mask policy and who are not, following the guidelines that we set in place. So like David said, it's almost like, one, I don't want to enter that situation angry at them for not doing that. So it's about having that compassion, but also I want to support my community in being safe. So that sometimes means that I have to hand someone a mask, say, hey, would you mind putting this on? So that's just a small example for me, but I, for the community, want us to get into a faster track. And I feel like that is supporting us in terms of making that social change positive. Because as much as everyone's going to have these different views and perspectives, it's also that this is kind of the mandate that's been put in place. It's actually the literal law. So I would like to support and do my part as a citizen and in this community to then support what's already in place.
That's all really helpful information, and I like to thank you guys for coming here and sharing that with not only us but our listeners as well.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for having us.
No, of course. And I kind of just want to wrap up the show by saying, again, thank you a million times for taking the time out of your day to come meet with us, to talk to us. We threw a lot of questions at you and some tough ones there as well. And you answered them with just the most amazing answers. So thank you so much. I think we all, we really gained a lot from talking with you. And I hope that our audience can take some stuff away from that as well. So thank you to the both of you for taking the time out of your day, for answering these questions, and for just being honest with us and just trying to help us as much as possible. So with that, that is the end of our show. That is the end of part 1 of COVID-19, specifically on mental health. When we come back, at some point, we will have a part 2 talking specifically about the medical field. But from now till that point, keep listening to The Intelligent World. Follow us on YouTube, on wherever you get your podcasts. Look us up online. Do all that jazz. We're on Instagram. Guys, thank you guys so much for being here with me. Chad, Matt, Marco, and Chris, who has left us early. But again, David and Jordan, thank you so much. We really appreciate it. You are listening to The Intelligent World. Keep listening to us. Thank you and goodbye.